I'm going to start off the second lesson by establishing the height of my characters in real-world scale. This is an important step you have to do to make sure your characters can integrate into scenes with characters and assets created by other artists. It also makes sure that your characters work well with the default settings of most dynamic systems. In the previous lesson, I established that the Anthro hare is going to be 5'11" and the Anthro snow leopard is going to be 5'5". This is a scene that has some of my old characters in view with their respective heights. I have them in here because I want to make sure I can establish the appropriate portions of these new characters I'm about to work on. Okay, let's start with the Anthro hare. I initially wanted to make him 5'11" because his ears are really tall and I didn't want it to be that difficult to capture him in frame when his ears are propped up. So I was going to make him 5'11", but I don't think the additional inches is going to hurt. So I'm going to go to the front view. And I'm going to go to create measuring tools, tear it off, go to the distance, and then hold down X to click on the floor to get a grid point. And I'm going to click to about there. And that should be it. So that should be about his height. I think I might have gone too far because 188. Let me look for the exact what 6 foot is going to be. So 6 foot is going to be 182 centimeters. So I'm going to take this, bring it down to about 182. So that's going to be his height. Now I'm going to create a little proxy for his head. So I'm going to create a sphere, scale it up, go to the front view, make sure it's not that large. What's the right size for his temple region? So that's going to be about the size of his head. I'm going to create 2 cubes to simulate his ear height. Move them to the side here, and that. Okay, so that's how potentially tall he could look in frame right next to Kira, and that looks good. All right, so that's going to be about his height. And now let's do for the snow leopard. She's going to be 5'5". So 5'5" is 167 centimeters. I'm going to go into the front view and grab the distance tool again. Click on the ground and just click anywhere up here. Looking for 167, so about there. Okay, so that's going to be her height. I'm just going to use this as her head marker. And so she's going to stop right about there. Let me grab all his shapes, his height, group them. You can hide them temporarily. And that's going to be about her height. So that's it for establishing their heights. Let's move into Zbrush. I'm going to export them as OBJs. So I'm going to grab his head, go File, Export Selection. Let's say King Bugsy Height Marker. We'll do the same for her. Go File, Export Selection. And I'm exporting them as OBJs. Say Big SNO Height Marker. All right, that's it. Let's get into Zbrush. Okay, so it looks like I started blocking her out with primitives and I was recording the wrong screen. So you guys missed all of this, but I'm going to do it for him so you see how I got here. All right, so I'm going to group all her stuff. I imported her height marker and his height marker. So that's him and that's her head from Maya. And this is a ground plane I brought in the scene. It'll help me to know where the floor is and where their feet should be touching. So I'm going to group everything for her. I'm going to come over here, hit the new folder, call it Big SNO. We'll come back to her. I was basically just moving primitives around. We'll revisit all of them again because this is just a basic block out with primitives. So I'm going to hide her and use him to show you how I got to her. So this is him, and what I started out with was a sphere like this and move it down. This sphere is going to be his lower torso, and I use a mask to select the bottom half, control click and blur, and then use the move tool to get what will be the lower part of the torso. Now I have activate symmetry, which I turn on immediately because I want things to happen on both sides. Activate symmetry can be located under the transform menu. It's right there, activate symmetry. And then I have mirror and weld occasionally if I forget to turn on active symmetry. Mirror and weld, which can be found in the geometry tab under modify topology. It's mirror and weld right there. It allows me to mirror whatever changes have not been going on the other side because I forgot to turn on active symmetry. Okay, so this is his lower torso. I'm going to append another sphere and work on his rib cage. So I'll move it down. And the rib cage is usually at an angle like this. So I'm going to get a nice little angle for his rib cage. And I'm going to use the move tool. It's an example of moving it without turning on symmetry. So I'll activate symmetry, then I'll do mirror and weld, and then it will now move the changes to the other side. So this is somewhat of a rib cage for him. And I'm going to try to make this a little bit more what you'd expect to see from the profile view of the lower part of the torso. Then I'm going to append another sphere and get his pelvic region. It's exactly what I did for her. It's about a good mark. His pelvic region. Hers was super wide. Let me put him in a folder too. Bugsy. Right, her, I used I spread the pelvis out, and then I added another one that represents the glutes and just shaped it a bit. Yeah, I'm really upset that I it's recording the other screen. Okay, so for him, this represents his pelvis. I'm going to move the stomach out because it typically is protruding, and then the pelvis is sort of receding like this because I want the stomach to be able to, the abdominal region to have its correct shape. It's sort of like a crescent dip into the pelvis region, and then this would represent, these sides here would represent the iliac spine of the pelvis. Like this would be the anterior superior iliac spine at this spot right there, and then this entire is the iliac spine of the pelvis that comes over to the front. Okay, let me append another sphere to represent his legs. I'm gonna stretch it a bit. It's pretty. And then what I'd like to do is angle it like that. And stretch it. Let me keep track of where the ground plane is. I'm gonna append another one, another sphere. That's gonna be the knee. Because we're just blocking out here with some primitives. He's not going to be as ham-limbed as she is. I was shooting for a really hand-limbed look for her. I mentioned it several times in the concepting phase. Duplicate his calf region from his thigh and get that. Okay, so this is a good starting point. Shape his tibia region right there. His legs are going to be fairly slim. He's overall is going to be a lot slimmer than her, so I'm going for the two contrasting physique types. Super slim, and she's going to be a lot heavier set. I'm going to move the hamstrings back and emphasize the quads a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to go active symmetry, mirror and weld to get this stuff to the other side. Activate symmetry, mirror and weld. Activate symmetry, mirror and weld, so you can actually see how thick his feet are getting. Here, I'm going to use the topological move because that allows you to move islands. So I'm better able to move away from each other. If you use the regular move tool, it'll try to move everything in the cursor's region. This regular move tool will just move everything. And this topological move will allow you to isolate islands. Okay. I think that's a good starting point for him. His pelvis is obviously a little bit too wide in the profile, and so is his back. For her, I did something which I think I'm also going to try with him, and that was make the block out the glutes as a separate piece too. So I'm going to grab this. Okay, so I appended a sphere and I'm going to move it down to start creating his glutes. And with her, unfortunately you didn't hear me mention it, but the glutes have a very butterfly-like feel to them. I'm going to activate symmetry and then mirror and weld. So the glutes have a butterfly feel to them. Let me push this pelvis geometry in so I can focus on this. So over here is where the sacral triangle would be. And this butterfly feel of the glutes, it has like this butterfly-like shape from the back view. Sort of sinks in like that. It's good to overemphasize it on the males. With her glutes, I went with more of a sloping, so it's curved upwards, curved in. That might change as I continue to block her out. But with him, I'm gonna go with a straighter, more masculine-like shape. So straighter, flatter. So this is where the sacral triangle would be. I'm not trying to get into too many details at this stage, so I won't be pushing that too far. So that's his butt. And another thing I think I'm missing is this pelvic region here. It has like this, there's this like bulge, this protrusion where the genitalia is supposed to be. I won't be sculpting any details like that. I won't be sculpting any nipples. I won't be sculpting, overemphasizing the crack of the glute, and I definitely won't be sculpting any genitalia. So if you don't want to see those things on your screen, or if you're somewhere where you don't want those things to pop up on your screen, you won't be seeing any of that in this piece. There's this like hook here, which is good to start emphasizing it now. It's called something arch. I've forgotten what it's called in anatomy. It's sitting right above the abdominal region. Okay, so it looks like something of his is too tall. I'll deal with that later so that his feet can come in. But let me get his neck and then his hands. So I'll pen the cylinder to get his neck. Keep it fairly straight. And let me do what I did with her. So what I did is I appended a sphere to represent the deltoid. And I used cylinders for her, but I think I'm just going to use the same sphere for him. His shoulders are fairly wide, so I'm going to keep this deltoid a little bit out here. I'm going to duplicate this to create his arm. His arm is going to be about like that. Scale it out. And I'm going to duplicate the sphere to create his elbow, to block out his elbow. Oh, this is going to be finessed aggressively. And then duplicate that to create his forearm. So the forearm is typically about the same length as the humerus. And so the same for the thigh and the shin portion, but you can exaggerate them whichever way you want. If you're doing your own style, you can exaggerate any portions that you want. I am underemphasizing her rib cage. So her rib cage is going to be a lot smaller than the human rib cage. Shape this a little bit. And I was talking about something for her that I'm really going to push on him, and it's a hook that usually comes. Let me show it to you. So it's a hook from the top of the forearm. As the top of the forearm is blending into the palm, there's this hook that you can overemphasize in males. It makes them look a lot more grislier, right? For a female, sometimes you want to have it nice and smooth and sleek. So for her, that might change as we keep going. But for him, I'm really going to overemphasize that. So I'm going to do his palm. I did that by appending a cube and move the cube into position. So about like that. And then scale it down. And then I go into the deformation menu and do smoothing, just to ease up, make the cube ease up a bit. Then I go into the top view and do mask and do a little rotation just to get a nice tapering for our wrist. Okay. And I have overemphasized this offset in the wrist. I'll fix it. Make sure he's not looking too hamlined. This view. And we're not getting into details so much here. This is pretty much just trying to get a good starting silhouette. When we get into details, we'll be doing everything. We'll be hinting at everything, because as I'm going to talk about later, I don't want tertiary detail or high frequency detail for these characters. Okay, so for him, the hook I'm talking about, I'm gonna create it by moving the palm forward a little bit more. And bring it down too. And then that allows there to be some type of a hook as the top of the forearm goes into the palm. This is going to be connected in the anatomically correct way. Have the bicep and the ridge group and everything behaving correctly. And as you see, what I'm doing with the hand this time around is I'm making sure that it's supinated, so the palms are pointing straight at us. And also the ulna and the radius are parallel to each other. When the hand is pronated, so if the hand was posed like this with the palms pointing downward, then that means the radius has rotated over the ulna and they have created an X shape. That is typically how you see rigs. People model their characters pose, but this time I want to try this palms pointing towards the screen approach. It feels cool. I saw it on a really cool artist model, and I realized it's also good pose to rig in. It's just a little different from the same old pronated palms. I'm going to hint at what would be the triceps here, and I suppose what would be the bicep on the front. And then back here we're going to start with a later hint at all the humerus that is exposed that goes into the elbow. But yeah, none of that detail right now. Let's have this straight. Okay, I'm going to merge all these pieces. So I have merge down up here, and you can find merge down in the subtool menu under the merge. It's over there. So in the subtool menu, well, under the tool menu and then the subtool submenu, you can come down to another submenu called merge, and you'll see all the merge functions there. I've moved them up there. So I'm going to go over there and go merge down to get all the hand pieces together, just so I can activate symmetry and mirror and weld. Okay, so that's him. And something I did for her, and I'm also going to do for him shortly, is test to see where the hands end up when you rotate them down. That is very long. Your hands wouldn't extend that far, But you can do whatever you want if you're, going for a certain look, stylized look. But I just want some not so freakishly long hands. So when you move, that's about good. I might shorten it more, but this is a good starting point. And I mentioned for her that I don't like just sculpting through and just keep going and going. Sometimes I want to take a break and just see what it's feeling like. So I like to have the characters just posed on the screen, and then I step back and take a look at them. In this case, because I'm creating two characters, when I step back, I'm going to start sculpting the other character. So let me hide this ground plate for now. We'll appease it later, but I'm gonna show him what I have of him so far. And then I'm going to show what I have of her. Hit the T key, redraw on the canvas, hit T again to get back into sculpting mode. And then pose her too. T key, get her in. Just stand back and look at both of them and continue the ideation process to see whether I'm heading in the right direction. While I shape these blocked out primitives to better represent the characters, I'm going to talk about some important things that should be shared. Maya and Zbrush are not synced as far as the up orientation is concerned, so everything you export from Maya that is upright will be upside down in Zbrush. This only becomes an issue in Zbrush if you are trying to simulate cloth, but it's an easy fix. You can just rotate your imported mesh to be oriented the other way around, or you can tell Z-cloth to simulate a negative gravity. Because these bodies are intended for grooming, their detailing is going to stop at the secondary form stage. This means I will not be sculpting any high frequency detail. Granular peaks and valleys will give the XGen grooming guides a difficult time orienting themselves on the surface of the body meshes. I did mention before that I will only be grooming parts of the body that are going to be visible for now, but in the future, if I decided to groom the whole body for an exercise, I want to make sure the entire mesh is ready to facilitate the grooming process. Here is a snippet from a behind the scenes video from Zootopia. They showcase the grooming of a particular character in layers. Notice how simple the base mesh is. I'm pretty sure it doesn't even use a displacement map. But they did that because they use XGen, and it simplifies things when the underlying mesh is smooth and free of tertiary detail. Some women have a pelvis that is slightly wider than the rib cage from the front view. When artists create idealized female characters, they take the opportunity to take advantage of this slight disparity in width of the pelvis and rib cage to differentiate the female characters from the male characters. It is important to know that there are women with smaller frames who don't have this distinction in the width of the pelvis versus the rib cage. It is also important to know that when you see a woman with very wide hips, even if the width of the rib cage and pelvis are the same, what you are looking at is fat tissue and muscle producing the extension of the hips. On the other hand, if you're experimenting with style and want to widen the pelvis to cartoonish levels, then go ahead and create a larger differential between the pelvis and the rib cage if you want. For these characters, I will be doing some exaggeration in certain areas. As I mentioned previously with the snow leopard, I'm going to underemphasize the overall size of her rib cage for a stylized effect, and for both of them, I'm going to underemphasize the size of their waists. For the snow leopard, I mentioned in the introductory video that her body style is inspired by the female characters in the Wakfu MMORPG. I first saw the style drafted by an artist who goes by the name of XaXaXa. I think he developed the characters that were later used in the Wakfu series. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Check out his character styles on DeviantArt. I've included the link on the screen. And for her, as I've mentioned a few times, I'm going for the ham-limbed ankles and very wide hips. Another artist who has the wide-hipped, ham-limbed look is an artist by the name of Nurzhan Bekaliev. I've included a link to his ArtStation page. Check out his really cool character designs. Even though I may end up going with a more natural pose for either of these characters later on as I detail them, I do have to prioritize a particular task. I need to be able to chart a straight line from the sacrum all the way up to the neck. This is not a requirement for every character model, but in my experience, regardless of what rigging system you are using, it is a lot easier to rig the spine functionality needed if the spine joints are straight. In reality, the lumbar, thoracic, and cervical portions of the spine form an S shape on the back part of your torso. But the differences it offers in deformation is not worth the painstaking process of dealing with a curved joint chain for a spine. As long as you make sure the joint chain for the spine is closer to the back of the character, you will get believable deformations for the spine, even if you go with a straight joint chain. One of the signature things you should see when you rotate the spine of a 3D character rig forward is the sense that there are internal organs in the front part of the torso that prevent the torso from completely folding into itself. I'm showcasing this on the screen now. Notice how, no matter how far she bends forward, the gut stays put. It doesn't deform or collapse. If you run the spine through the center of the torso, you won't get that. The torso will move like a worm. So putting the spine towards the back of the torso where it belongs is very important. I want to reiterate that it's okay for you to set up your 3D joints in the anatomically correct S shape, but just be ready to deal with the challenges that come with providing a workable spine rig for animators. For me, being able to chart a straight line from the sacrum to the neck is a simple thing to accommodate at the modeling stage that simplifies the rigging process significantly. The same logic applies to the arms and the legs when it comes to rigging. It is better for them to be straight, so a T-pose is ideal for rigging. However, one of the things that is necessary when sculpting character anatomies is to be able to see the character in a more natural pose. A T-pose is not natural. An A-pose for the arms and legs is more natural. A natural pose is important because it helps you to represent weight in your character sculpts better. So, one approach is to sculpt the character in a natural A pose and then pose it in a T pose when it's time to send it off to the rigging stage. I do this very often. For my last character, I modeled her feet traveling straight down as a T pose would require, but modeled her spine in a more natural pose, and her arms also in a more natural A pose. I had to straighten the spine when it was time to rig her because I could not chart a straight line from her sacrum all the way up through her torso to her neck. So I had to make that adjustment. On the left side of the screen, I'm showing the before and after photos of the character's torso in Zbrush. I did leave her arms in an A pose because I'm familiar with all the techniques needed to rig them correctly. I did run into an issue with pole vectors for the arms, but I was able to resolve it. For these characters, I do not want to run into that issue that I had with the pole vectors for the arms. So even if I end up with some natural poses at the end of the modeling session, I'm going to straighten everything to simplify the rigging process, especially since this time I have to deal with two characters. So to conclude, I'm going to keep the arms straight, the legs are going to remain straight, the torso is going to have a more natural pose, but I'll still be able to chart a straight line from the sacrum to the neck. When it comes to the fingers and the feet, I want the snow leopard's fingers to have some sleekness to them, so I'm not going with a puffy Anthro wildcat look. I did this for my last character and many others. I will, however, be going with the puffy or patty finger look with the Anthro hare character. To be clear, I'm still going with finger and palm padding for her, it just won't be as puffy. I'm going to model the feet small because I don't want them to overwhelm the sneakers. The feet are still going to be a hybrid between human feet and quadruped feet, but I'll try to keep them within the volume of the sneaker designs I have chosen. So the overall silhouette of the feet will be more human-like. but I will allow the digits to be more like that of a quadruped for both of them. And just like the fingers, the feet and the digits will have padding underneath them. With a realistic quadruped, the main padding under the foot only encompasses the ball of their foot. But since these are Anthro characters that have their entire foot planted, I'm going to extend the padding all the way up to the heel. Alright, that's it for this information dump. Let's get back to shaping out these blocked out primitives. While I was updating you with all that information, you watched me do some cleanup on his silhouette. I added a chest with a sphere I shaped, and then I added another sphere which I shaped into his upper back. I'm going to move over to her so we can get her to about this level too. So I'm going to hide his pieces, but I added his chest and back. And we're trying to get her up to par. So let me put that ground plane in here. Yeah, it looks like she is super short. I have not made her tall enough. So what I'm going to do is go into the transpose tool. I'm going to go Z plugin and look for the transpose master, say T-pose mesh. Now I'm going to isolate her legs, stretch them, turn off perspective temporarily, go to scale, here, that's about good lengthening of her legs. Transpose Master allows you to move, since I've separated these into little pieces, it's not going to be too smart to move them individually to scale her legs. So Transpose Master allows you to deal with all the pieces as one subtool. So now I'm going to T-pose subtract, send changes back. Okay. And then let me look at this here. This was supposed to start hinting at how this slopes into the back. Oh, this is just a redundant piece. I should be moving this back. I already established what the pelvic region was going to be with that. Okay, that makes more sense. That's for the glutes. This will start making sense later. And since this is helping us with the glutes, yeah, it should be something like that. Now it's time to establish the width of her ankle region. So I'm going to try. The inside of your ankle, the inside one is higher than the outside one, and then the calves, the outside part is higher than the inside part, so it creates this like opening triangle effect. I'm not going to go too grizzly with the legs. She's a female. I want some really smooth results. I want that ham-limbed look. Tibia is going to come right here. Yeah, and somewhere along the line, I'm going to let that adductor mass here be isolated. It's a little bit more swollen on the inside there, and then it kind of slopes out like this. Somewhere along the line, I'm going to continue the emphasis of that. Shape it many more times. As we move to the higher levels, I'm going to reduce the topology count of this geometry so I get better averaging. So that's something you're going to see me do. All right, let me add a sphere to start molding her chest. So I'm going to append a sphere. Little shelf you have to allow at the top where the pectoralis is actually occupying to put the breast tissue. So the breast tissue sits somewhere down here. You need a little bit of a shelf here. Now in a more realistic anatomy, that shelf is a lot taller, but here, because we're underemphasizing her ribcage is going to be way smaller than a human rib cage. I'm going to try to keep that space between the manubrium and where the tissue starts. I'm going to keep it smaller, but it's a pretty large portion where the pectoralis exists before the breast tissue comes. And one thing I should be aiming for is this roundness of the rib cage that these breasts sort of wrap around. This is just one way to do things. For me, it reminds you you're not being too serious at this stage. I don't want to do any hardcore sculpting detailing, so I'm just using a move brush and some primitive shapes just to move things around and establish some of the basic shapes that we'll be going for. And I'm going to try to simulate the chest and connecting tissue that connects the sort of deltoids to the chest. Hinting at the clavicle. Remind myself that it does, in fact, they look like bicycle handlebars, so they're not straight back. This is more sloping. So this wider, and I'm going to make it wider. I'm going to go with the uniboob for now. Look like she's wearing that bodysuit that we're going to actually create. I want to start creating the actual separated tissue. Now for her, I'm not going to add any additional piece to further increase the volume of the back, because I don't want her to look too muscular in the neck area. So I'm just going to pull this geometry to start hinting at the traps. And work on this plane break in the back. Okay, so this is a good starting point for her. One thing I can start putting in for her is something that just hints at her ears. Just help myself visualize this stuff better. Just a really simple thing. Just something to get started. It's obviously going to change more than expected. It's going to change a lot. I went ahead and widened her legs a little bit because I like that really solid triangle-like, properly grounded look. As we proceed, things might change. I want to see how things look like when I get the tail in and the feet in. Okay, this lesson has gotten a bit too long. In the next lesson, I will finish this primitive block out of their bodies by blocking in the feet and the fingers, and I'll also get their tails. Then I'll finish that lesson by unifying these isolated meshes so that I can start shaping the silhouette and primary forms of both characters.